We're going to do the Kitchener stitch now, also known as grafting, and that's what gives you a lovely neat seam-free toe at the end of your sock, because there's nothing worse than having bumpy bits in your sock to annoy your toes when they're in your shoes. I've cut my yarn. I've cut a length of about 12 inches, 30 centimetres, and I've threaded it onto a tapestry or a wool needle, because that's the easiest way to do the Kitchener stitch. I've got my stitches evenly divided, so I have 14 stitches on each of my needles, and now I'm just going to match them up by sewing them together so that we get a nice neat edge that you won't be able to even notice that there's been any stitching going on. I'm going to start off by putting my needle purlwise into the first stitch on the front needle, and I don't take the stitch off, but I put my needle knitwise into the first stitch on the back needle. Now they're the two setup stitches, and now we're going to start the Kitchener stitch properly, and this is how we go across the whole of the top of the sock. I'm going to put my needle knitwise into the first stitch on the front needle, and I'm going to slide it off. Give it a little tug here so that you don't end up with it being too loose, because you won't be able to pull it and tighten it later on, so you need to make sure that you keep it nice and tight here, and also make sure that you keep the yarn under the needles that you're holding in your left hand. Next I'm going to go purlwise into what is now the first stitch on the left hand needle that was the second stitch, and I'm going to leave this stitch on the needle. I'm now going to move to the back needle. I'm going to put my needle purlwise into the first stitch. Notice I'm keeping the yarn here underneath the needle, and I'm giving it a little tug to keep it tight, and I'm going to slide this stitch off the needle, and then I'm going to put my needle knitwise into the second stitch, which is now the first stitch on the back, and I'm going to leave it. Shuffle your stitches up a little bit if you need to, so that you don't worry about dropping any of them off, and we're going to go back to the front needle. I'm going to put my needle in knitwise and slip the stitch off. I'm going to give it a little tug here, make sure that it's closing the top over the way I'd like it to. I'm going to put my needle purlwise into the next stitch. Now to the back needle, I'm going to put my needle in purlwise. Notice my yarn is under this needle, give it a little tug to keep it tight and slide it off, and then put my needle in knitwise and leave it on the needle. Back to the front needle, needle goes in knitwise, and then you slip it off. Needle goes in purlwise, leave it on the needle. Back needle goes in purlwise, slip it off, knitwise, leave it on. Front needle, knitwise, slip it off, purlwise, leave it on. Back needle, purlwise, slip it off, knitwise, leave it on. And I'm going to show you what's happening here. You can see the stitches are being created here. They're not too loose, they're not too baggy. I can always give them another little tug if I need to, and you can see that the end of the sock is starting to close over. Now I repeat these 4 movements, so knitwise, purlwise, purlwise, knitwise, until I get to the end of the sock. We've got 4 stitches left on the needle now, so we're just going to finish these off. I'm not going to do any kind of special finishing off stitches here, because it's enough that the yarn will just go through the stitches and that will hold it securely. So I'm going to go knitwise through the first stitch, purlwise through the second stitch, onto the back needle, purlwise through the first stitch, knitwise through the second stitch, and I'm going to slide them all off the needle. You can see that it's nice and neat all across the top, and in fact it doesn't look like the knitting has stopped in any way from this side round to that side at all. Now this is one of the ears that some people worry about. All I tend to do is take the yarn across the back of the ear and then weave it in, and then that pulls it down so that you don't see it anymore. If you need to, just put the needle back in the yarn again. Now you can choose to weave in any way that you like. I tend to just go in and out of the stitches all the way down the length of the sock for about an inch or so, and then I will come up another row of the stitches. The needle doesn't want to go through here, and that's how I will finish off my sock, just by weaving in and out of the stitches. There may be a better way, but this way works perfectly well for my socks. I don't have a problem with them coming undone. I don't have a problem with lumpy bumpy bits. If you want to use a different way, that's absolutely fine. There may be a more technically perfect way than mine, but as long as it doesn't come undone, that's the main thing. So just weave the end in a good long way to make sure that your end isn't going to come undone at all, and then that's your sock finished.